The storm came without mercy, rolling across the empty plains like a living beast determined to swallow everything in its path. Dark clouds twisted together in the sky, thunder cracked like gunfire, and the freezing wind howled through the tall grass of the lonely frontier. Most people had already taken shelter hours earlier, locking their doors and waiting for the storm to pass. But one man was still riding through the chaos. His name was Daniel Carter, a lone cowboy who had spent most of his life riding the endless lands of the American frontier. Daniel was known by the people of nearby towns as a quiet man, strong, dependable, and rarely talkative. He had no family left, no home waiting for him, only the dusty roads and the faithful horse beneath him. His black coat whipped wildly in the wind as he urged his horse forward through the storm. "Easy, boy," Daniel muttered, leaning low against the violent gusts. Lightning flashed across the sky, turning the dark world bright for a split second. In that brief moment of light, Daniel saw something strange ahead on the roadside. At first, he thought it was a broken wagon or maybe a pile of debris blown by the storm. But as his horse moved closer, Daniel felt a sudden uneasiness tighten in his chest. Another bolt of lightning ripped across the sky, and this time he saw it clearly. Someone was lying on the ground. Daniel quickly pulled the reins. His horse snorted nervously as rain lashed against them like icy needles. Daniel jumped down and rushed toward the figure lying in the mud. It was a woman. She was dressed in a torn white wedding gown, the once beautiful fabric now soaked with rain and covered in dirt. Her blonde hair clung to her pale face, and her hands were trembling weakly as she struggled to breathe. For a moment, Daniel froze. A bride, out here in the middle of a deadly storm? "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Her eyes slowly opened. They were filled with fear, exhaustion, and something else. Something deeper. Hopelessness. She tried to speak, but her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, don't leave me." Daniel had seen many things in his life: bar fights, cattle thieves, even men dying on lonely trails. But seeing a helpless woman abandoned in a storm like this stirred something inside. Him he hadn't felt in years. Anger. Whoever left her here meant for her to die. Without hesitation, Daniel removed his coat and wrapped it around her shaking body. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "I ain't leaving you here." The woman looked at him with disbelief, as if she could not believe anyone would help her. Thunder roared above them again. Daniel gently lifted her into his arms. She was weak, far too weak to stand on her own. He carried her carefully to his horse and secured her in front of him on the saddle. "Hold on," he told her. The ride back to his small cabin was slow and difficult. The storm fought against them every mile, and the road had nearly disappeared beneath. Rivers of mud, but Daniel refused to stop. Nearly an hour later, a small wooden cabin finally appeared through the darkness. It was simple, just one room, a fireplace, and a small stable beside it. But at that moment, it might as well have been a palace. Daniel quickly brought the horse to the stable and then carried the woman inside. The warmth of the fireplace slowly began to fill the room as Daniel placed another log into the fire. The flames flickered across the wooden walls, chasing away the cold darkness that had followed them from outside. He gently laid the woman on the bed. She looked even weaker in the firelight. Daniel poured warm water into a cup and helped her sit up. "Drink," he said softly. She took a few small sips, her hands still shaking. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The storm continued raging outside, rattling the windows and shaking the cabin. Finally, Daniel asked the question that had been on his mind since he found her. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated. "My name is Emily," she answered quietly. Daniel nodded once. "I'm Daniel." She studied his face carefully, as if trying to understand whether he was someone she could trust. "You saved my life," she whispered. Daniel shrugged slightly. Anyone would have done the same. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Many men would have ridden past without stopping. Emily lowered her eyes, gripping the edge of the blanket. "They left me," she said. Daniel's expression hardened. "Who?" "My husband, and the men who brought me here." Daniel frowned. "Husband?" Emily slowly explained between trembling breaths. She had come from far away after answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. A wealthy rancher in the territory had written letters promising her a new life, a safe home and a loving marriage. For a woman with no family and no future, it had seemed like a miracle. But when she arrived, everything changed. The man who married me, he wasn't the one who wrote the letters, Emily said, tears forming in her eyes. Daniel leaned forward. What do you mean? He was cruel, drunk, and angry the moment he saw me. Emily's voice shook as she continued. He said I wasn't what he expected. He said I was worthless. Daniel's jaw tightened. And tonight, during the storm, he dragged me outside. Her hands trembled violently now. He told his men to throw me on the road and leave me there. Daniel felt a slow, burning rage spreading through his chest. They were going to let you die. Emily nodded silently. The fire crackled between them. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Finally, he stood and walked toward the window, staring out at the raging storm. He had spent years avoiding trouble, living quietly, staying away from other people's problems. But this was different. No decent man could ignore something like this. Behind him, Emily spoke again. I don't have anywhere to go, she said softly. Her voice carried a deep, heartbreaking truth. I have no family, no money, and no one who would believe me. Daniel turned back toward her. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. She believed she was completely alone in the world. But something inside Daniel had already made a decision. You ain't alone tonight, he said firmly. Emily looked at him surprised. Daniel pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. You rest, he said. We'll figure the rest out in the morning. For the first time since he found her on that lonely road, Emily's expression softened slightly. Outside, the storm continued to roar across the dark plains. But inside the small cabin, the fire burned steadily. Neither of them knew that by sunrise, the truth about Emily's past would begin to surface. And when it did, it would shock the entire town. Morning arrived slowly after the violent storm. The dark clouds that had terrorized the night finally began to fade, and a pale golden sunlight stretched across the wide, empty plains. Outside Daniel Carter's small cabin, the land was quiet again, as if the storm had never existed. Inside the cabin, Emily slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. The warm blanket, the smell of burning wood, and the soft crackling of the fireplace felt strange and unfamiliar. Then she remembered. The storm, the road, and the cowboy who saved her. She sat up carefully and looked around the room. Daniel was standing near the window, watching the morning sky while holding a cup of coffee. You're awake, he said calmly without turning around. Emily nodded weakly. I thought maybe last night was a dream. Daniel placed another log in the fire. No dream, he replied. You're safe here. Emily stepped closer to the window and looked outside. The endless land stretched far beyond the cabin, quiet and peaceful now. But her face slowly filled with worry again. They'll come looking for me, she said nervously. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Emily hesitated. The man I married, Thomas Grady. He owns the biggest ranch near the town. Powerful men like him don't like when someone escapes. Daniel had heard that name before. Thomas Grady was known in the area as a rich but ruthless rancher. Many people feared him, but few had the courage to stand against him. Daniel slowly turned toward Emily. You didn't escape, he said quietly. Emily looked confused. What do you mean? You were left to die in a storm, Daniel replied. That's not marriage. That's a crime. Emily lowered her eyes. People won't believe me. Daniel stared at her for a moment before speaking. They will, if we make them. Emily looked at him in surprise. You do that for me? Daniel gave a small shrug. A man's got to do the right thing once in a while. Later that morning, they rode toward the nearby town. The muddy road still showed the scars of the storm, but the sky above them was now bright and calm. When they reached town, people immediately noticed the strange sight, the quiet cowboy Daniel Carter riding beside a young bride in a torn wedding dress. Whispers quickly spread. Within an hour, nearly the entire town had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Emily's hands trembled as she told her story. The sheriff listened carefully, his face growing darker with every word. Many townspeople were shocked. Some were angry. Others looked ashamed that such cruelty had been happening so close to their homes. And then something unexpected happened. An old ranch worker stepped forward. "I worked for Thomas Grady," the man said loudly. "Everything the girl says is true." Another man stepped forward. "And I saw them throw her out last night." Suddenly the truth could no longer be hidden. By afternoon, Sheriff Collins and several deputies rode toward Grady's ranch. The arrest happened before sunset. Thomas Grady was taken into custody for attempted murder and cruelty. His men scattered like frightened wolves when the law finally arrived. News spread quickly across the territory. People were shocked that a powerful rancher could fall so quickly, all because one brave girl survived the storm. A few days later, Emily stood outside the small church in town. She was no longer wearing the torn wedding dress from that terrible night. Instead, she wore a simple blue dress, clean and warm. But what mattered most was the look on her face. For the first time in a long time, she looked hopeful. Daniel stood beside his horse a few steps away, preparing to leave town like he always did. Emily walked toward him. "Daniel," she said softly. He looked at her. "You're free now," he said. Emily nodded. "Yes, because of you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily asked quietly, "Where will you go now?" Daniel looked toward the endless horizon. "Same place I always go," he said. "Wherever the road takes me." Emily smiled slightly. "Well, maybe the road could take you back here sometimes." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then for the first time since they met, a small smile appeared on his face. "Maybe it will." The wind moved gently across the plains, nothing like the deadly storm that had brought them together. And in that quiet moment, Emily realized something important. The storm that was meant to destroy her had actually saved her life, because it led her to the one man who refused to ride, away when she needed hope the most.